SECfans.com. 2017 is here. We missed y'all for the last couple of months after the 2016 season. No, we didn't go running and hiding because Alabama lost to Clemson. We went running and hiding to do a bunch of family stuff, but we're here. We're ready to rock and roll. We're going to talk some college football as usual. We're going to get nerdy with you, analytic, real statistics-based, driven conversation here. So if you like that, if you like to dig deep into the details, then you're in the right place. And if you don't, hang out anyway and listen to what we got to say. So later in the week, we're going to put out what kind of you've come to expect from us in terms of preview shows and things like that for specific games. But first, before we get into that, I want to let everybody know, like as usual, that Husky is with me again, and we want to talk about quarterbacks, SEC quarterbacks. It's funny because year in and year out, the SEC is considered a league that's got a really, weak quarterback play, and that the SEC defenses are kind of propped up because of that. Now, we don't see that come bowl time. It usually plays out the other way. The SEC quarterbacks do pretty well against other conferences, but that's another topic for another day. What I want to talk about is the new faces that we've got this year in the SEC and some of the old faces that are going to have to step up their game a little bit if they want to bring their team to the promised land. So, Husky, let's start off with the newest face, and that would be Jarrett Stidham in Auburn. Kind of a big, high-profile snag there by Gus Malzahn to run his Auburn offense. And a couple of questions for you. One, I'd like for you to talk about kind of what he brings to the table, because we see that he's a little bit of a different style quarterback than we've seen in the real successful Gus Malzahn offensive approaches. And two, I'd like to talk about the pressure that's being put on him already before the first snap at Auburn. Is it too much pressure, or have you seen enough from him on tape from his other games to say that no, the pressure's real and it's worthy and he can handle it and you expect a lot from him? I'll let you take it away.
Stylistically, I think Stidham is a drop-back passer with some level of mobility, but that said, he's not really the dual-threat quarterback that he's being made out to be. Now, at this point in the season, being that we're not in the season, we don't have a lot of statistics to draw from. As Daniel noted a second ago, we tend to be a more, objective, statistic-driven. Some would probably accuse us of being cold-hearted, but at the end of the day, we're trying to keep things as objective as possible, in large part because we don't feel like everyone necessarily does the best job right now of evaluating teams relative to each other and their true strengths and weaknesses. That said, we do have a little bit to draw from with Stidham. We've seen what he did at Baylor. You can kind of throw out stuff in the spring and fall. It's not really indicative of anything. But my impression of Stidham is that he's essentially Bo Wallace with a better arm. I mean, that's kind of my takeaway. Now, he only really played in 3 games at Baylor, and I think one of the important things to realize about the Baylor offense is that it's a one-read offense generally. It is drop back and gun it, and more often than not in their offense, when they're throwing to a receiver downfield, he tends to be wide open. And why do I bring all that up? Because, Stidham had some great numbers in 2 games. He had really bad numbers in another one, but we don't tend to talk about that. But, by and large, I don't think you can really gauge anything off it because the offense is so driven basically on if the other team can't stop the run consistently, you have receivers running vertical. Baylor's receivers are too fast. You get a lot of points really quickly. Remember, this is Baylor from 2 years ago, not 1. So why do I have all that word vomit? Basically, it comes down to the fact that when you actually look at Stidham on tape and you look at his strengths and weaknesses, I don't think he's a straight line runner. He's comfortable running, but I don't think he's any better than like a 4.8 guy. I mean, he's not, again, the reason I compared to Bill Wallace is he's about the same height, he's about the same size, and I think he's about as fast. Now, with a guy like that, you can run the zone read, have the running back coming around the edge, and you can have a threat where if you have an inside zone read, meaning the running back is in an inside out zone read. By the way, if you ever see the running back behind the quarterback in the zone read, it's an inside zone read. So the running back's behind and to the side of the quarterback. Since he's behind him, the angle to the quarterback means he's going to take the handoff and run straight ahead. The quarterback, then if he doesn't give the ball to the running back, will run around in. In that scheme, Stidham doesn't have the speed to get the edge. Now, Nick Marshall, several years ago at Auburn, was devastating to teams, but it's because the guy was a legit 4-5 runner. I mean, he's an NFL caliber corner athletically. So in that inside zone read scheme, he could fake the inside handoff, and if you crashed on the inside run, he would get the edge on you, and he could be all the way downfield. Bo Wallace, on the other hand, when he was at Ole Miss, really all he did in the zone read scheme was ensure that the outside linebacker was somewhere near the line of scrimmage. If you didn't account for him, Wallace, he could kind of gallop for about 12 yards before a safety ran him down, but he wasn't anywhere near and fast enough to split safeties and corners. And by and large, it would be like a 4 or 5 yard run. You just gave them an easy, you crash on the running back, you give them an easy 5-yard run, and they would take that play in and play out. And also, he had the size really to do the inside run. And I say that because, we talk about the inside zone read, which is what Auburn tended to do with Nick Marshall, who was a fast guy, and used the running back for the inside dive. Bigger quarterbacks like Bo Wallace at Ole Miss way back when, and perhaps Stidham, are more suited to the outside zone read. It's the same thing they used Jeremy Johnson quite a bit a few years ago. And what happens there, the running back is directly next to the quarterback, so he's in line. And because of that, when he gets the handoff, he's running, if you think about it, if the running back's 2 yards to his left and he comes to you, he's running side to side. So when he gets the handoff, he always goes outside. By the way, if you understand this, you can predict every play Oregon runs, every play anybody runs, Auburn, whoever with his zone read. This isn't anything, by the way, that's rocket science. This is just kind of the way it is, absence of basically trick plays. So if the running back's coming a parallel, you either hand the ball to the running back who goes off tackle, or the quarterback keeps it and he runs the dive. Now what that does is it basically holds the middle linebackers in place because you have a threat for the inside run. It keeps the defensive tackles from stunning, and it kind of holds the DNs in place. And all you're doing is saying, look, if you completely crash to the outside and leave, the backside, over pursue, don't have anybody in the middle, I'm going to take 5 yards up the gut on you, and I'm going to do it again and again. There's kind of a couple problems with that. First, absent a few players, not many guys have the endurance to run that inside zone read. A couple great ones everybody's quite familiar with are Cam Newton and Tim Tebow. Both were huge players. I mean, Tebow was, 240, about 6'1", could have played linebacker, did try his hand at tight end in the NFL. Cam Newton was built like an NFL defensive end. So those guys could run right up the gut and overpower you. But those are very much the exceptions to the rule. With a guy like Stidham, again, more suited to that outside zone read where he's running the inside handoff, it's hard for them to have durability to continue to do that. It's also asking a lot for your quarterback to run into the teeth of the defense. Jeremy Johnson, when they asked him to do the same play, I don't think he was ever comfortable with it. Johnson was a very good athlete. My opinion was always that he wasn't a natural runner, meaning when you actually saw him on the hoof in pads running in a football game, he didn't really have any wiggle. He didn't have vision in the hole. I mean, it all sounds sort of stupid for a quarterback, but you know what? He's got the ball and he's running. He's a running back. And that's what differentiates some guys versus others. So why do I say all this? Because I think there's a lot of viewpoint in people's minds that Auburn's going to go back to the Nick Marshall offense. That's really completely unrealistic, frankly, with Stidham, because he's not fast enough or quick enough to get the edge. You can't run that inside zone read with a power tailback up the middle and the quarterback around the edge more than just a couple times to keep people honest, absent a much faster quarterback than Stidham is. Now, I think he's a good passer. Everything else I've just said. He is a good passer. Bo Wallace was a good passer. Now, he was a head case and didn't show up sometimes, and I'm not saying Stidham is that. But I'm saying in terms of arm strength, he's above average arm strength. I think he's fairly accurate. I don't think he's extremely accurate, having watched him on tape. I definitely think he's an upgrade from what Auburn's had before in terms of arm strength, but I also think he's probably not as accurate in the intermediate game. Now, I'm going to take everything I said there, and I know I've been going a while, but sort of the next step to all this is to understand that Shaun White, in the middle of the season last year, was leading the SEC in yards per attempt. He had about 9 yards per attempt in the month of October. And he did that because Auburn ran a lot of zone plays, sweep plays, very heavy on the run game, And when safeties would come down, they would bootleg Sean White, who was actually very athletic, and I will add probably faster than Stidham. And when he could get on the edge in that bootleg, he would hit somebody about 12 yards downfield consistently. It wasn't just that the guy would be open, but Sean White was extremely accurate about delivering the football when healthy on that play. Stidham is not nearly that accurate, frankly. Now, White could not push the ball vertically very well at all. He had limited arm strength. More importantly, I think people miss, White had really limited height. So when he was sitting in the pocket, he really needed, they rolled him out a lot, they moved him around so they didn't have a window to throw. He really wasn't comfortable standing in the pocket with linemen in his face and throwing over them down the field to the hash. Stidham can do that, so he gives you verticality to the offense. All in all, though, it's really different stylistically than I think what a lot of Auburn fans or other fans nationally are anticipating. This shouldn't be a return to the fanciful dual threat wild days of Cam Newton and Nick Marshall, just because Stidham is not really built to run that offense. I think at his best, Jarrett Stidham is what Jeremy Johnson should have been. Now, I'll leave one last thing here before I turn it back to you, and that's when I say Stidham is what Jeremy Johnson should have been, I think that should give a small amount of pause. Now, I think Auburn's offense in that, pretty epic year where Jeremy Johnson almost lost them a game against Jacksonville State in the opener, or it may have been week 2, I don't remember, but, we all get the picture. The thing there wasn't so much to me ever about Jeremy Johnson as a player. It was what they were asking him to do. Auburn's offense is a bit simplified. It's when you say it's a trick play offense, you mean it's built to expose people in play action, get one-on-one matchups, and get people out of position, all predicated on the run game. And I think when Malzahn had a pro-style quarterback at Johnson, he felt like he needed to change the whole offense to make use of that and be a pass-first quarterback. The only time he's really ever been pass-first is 1 year at Tulane. The rest of the time, like Tulane, where he learned Todd Graham's offense, which is a zone read offense that's still being used at Arizona State, it's generally a run-first offense that passes off of it. And I think if he uses Stidham the way he used Sean White last year, which is minimal amount of scrambling ability, a mobile quarterback in the backfield, and somebody to hit the occasional play-action pass to keep teams honest, then I think Auburn's dominant offensive line and running game will take up most of the brunt of the effort, and they're going to leave Stidham with the windows he needs to be successful. If, however, he tries to execute a pass-first offense, given the state of Auburn at receiver, which I have real questions about, and the fact that Auburn's whole offensive system is really just not that sophisticated in terms of a straight passing game, I think at that point Stidham will struggle. So my point there is it's really almost to me less about Stidham and his qualities as it is the way he gets utilized in this offense. And the more Malzahn backs off and lets Lindsey take over and call the plays and run it the way it needs to be run, I think the more successful they're going to be.
The thing that I've heard you talk about before in Auburn's offense, and I got a few takeaways from what you just said, and it's partially based on kind of just what you said and a little bit what I didn't expect, and some of what I know you think about Gus Malzahn and the offenses that he employs. You've noted historically Auburn's offense under Gus Malzahn has been its most lethal when it was that run 60-70% of the time, set the edge, run, pop a bomb. That sort of Nick Marshall lethal offense. And like you said, Cam Newton's a freak, so it's kind of hard to say, that's his DNA. Anybody would love to have Cam Newton as part of their DNA every year. But you've also said that he's constantly or frequently flirted with a different style of offense, maybe to show that he can do the full breadth of it, or that he's not a one-trick pony, but have that sort of pass-first, air raid, a little bit style offense that he was able to do one season, I think at Tulsa before he got to Auburn, but hasn't really had the chance to replicate it before or since. So my question is he going to try to do a little bit of that now? Does he even have enough influence in the offense anymore to do that now? And if he does try to do that, where they're throwing a lot more, they have a quarterback that's not going to be running the ball a lot, can he be successful?
My guess is early on in the season they will try to do that. I think there were signs of it last year in the opener against Clemson. They had a rotating, door of quarterbacks in that game, but they also tried a lot more vertical passes. I remember, I mentioned Jeremy Johnson because, as I said, I felt like when they put Jeremy Johnson in the game, one of the big things was it was like Malzahn lost his mind and he tried to play the game completely differently. In that Clemson opener, they put Jeremy Johnson in and they immediately throw a downfield pass, and Johnson throws a strike for about 40 yards, gets him to about the Clemson 35-yard line, as I remember. The next play, Johnson drops back, and they ask him to throw another deep pass, and he throws it right to the Clemson safety. Maybe it was 3 plays later. I'm just bringing this off the top of my head. But the point there was, with Sean White, they were throwing 5-yard passes and working their way down the field slowly, running the ball. And the moment he had a passer, he felt like he wanted to get aggressive. And the problem is aggression is really only successful in college football when, one, you're very, very good at it and you have the receivers to exploit it, or two, you're very, very patient about using it. And even the best air raid offenses are really predicated more off the 5-yard hitches and bubble screens and whatnot. Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M, the vast majority of their plays were little bubble screens to swoops, or at the time, this little freshman named Mike Evans. So I fear that Malzahn will start off that way a little bit. Now, I think he's going to give more control to his offensive coordinator just because of, past indications are that he's had to do that, was successful when he did it. There's a lot of pressure on him to do so. And if so, I think they'll be successful. So, my personal opinion is I think that at some point level they're going to be a little more pass happy than they should be. But at the end of the day, they're going to back off a little bit, and they're going to let Lindsey run with it, and they're going to be more of the pro-style offense as they should be. However, all that said, if they're too successful or if they're struggling too much, I could see them make a change. And you never know quite what people are going to do. And I think if they do make that change and they do try to be a pass-first offense, I just think it plays far away from their strengths, which is a very powerful run game and a very powerful offensive line. And instead, you're handing the ball to a first-year starting quarterback. You're putting it behind an offensive line that isn't really built for pass blocking, and you're throwing to an extremely young and unproven wide receiver core. So I just think that would be a serious mistake.
So I think we've spent probably a little longer on Stidham than we planned, but I think it's an important position on an important team this year to talk about. Auburn starts out preseason, I think they came out number 12. And there's really high expectations down there. There's kind of a joke in the SEC about how Auburn in the summer awards a lot of Heismans. Jeremy Johnson is the one that sticks out in my head the most because their fans are very optimistic. To their credit, they're very optimistic. And this year is no different. They're talking title down there. They're talking, 11, 12 win season. And I don't know that it's entirely unreasonable. But for them to get to that 10-11 win season, be it in the race at the end of the year for the playoffs, they really do need considerable production from the quarterback. And that gets back to my pressure question. So, as we talked about before, there's been a lot of pressure put on him and by proxy the rest of the team to really make a run this year. Do you think the pressure is unfair? And do you think they have the quarterback and the team, for that matter, to realize those expectations?
I honestly don't think the pressure is unfair because I think Auburn does have the talent on both sides of the ball. They have certainly the talent offensively. Maybe it's young at receiver, but they're very talented guys, and they have an experienced offensive line and backfield. So I think it is fair to that extent. Now, pressure is never fair for college football players the way we apply it. These are Stidham is 19 or 20 years old. He's played in 3 college games. We don't know what to expect of him, and we shouldn't expect him to come in and be an immediate veteran starter. And I think that's going to be the expectation. But in terms of what they can achieve, sure, I think it's reasonable to expect them to be a very good football team this year.
You don't think the pressure is unreasonable in terms of the personnel they have, but when you're open about Stidham, I didn't get the sense from what you were saying that you have the same expectations for him that maybe Auburn fans do. So, without getting into what we expect from Auburn this year, because we're going to cover that, if Jarrett Stidham isn't a top 2 or 3 quarterback in the league, like, I guess I'll take a step back and say, how much better does Jarrett Stidham have to be than what they had last year for them to realize those expectations? And based on what you said about him in the open and what you've seen relative to this offense, can he be that guy?
I think he has to be a pretty substantial improvement, honestly, to hit the level that Auburn fans are expecting to some degree. I think one of the important things to remember about Auburn last year is, in a few, basically they did about exactly what you'd think, and I'm not sure how close they were to doing all that much better. Early in the season, they played Texas A&M when they were healthy, lost that game fairly handily. They lost pretty handily to Alabama late in the season. Early on, they lose to Clemson close, doing a little better than they maybe should have. Beat LSU close, probably beating an LSU team, frankly, that was better than them, other than the fact that they played better that day. And they lost to Georgia close, which they probably shouldn't have done. Again, they beat Vanderbilt close, which that shouldn't have happened either. Point from all of that is there were a couple games they weren't really necessarily in Texas A&M and Alabama. There were several more games that they were close in, and outside of probably the Clemson game, which I think you do have to admit that Clemson was not a very good football team in the first 5 games or so of the season. They just weren't. Then out of the rest of them, I mean, they were more or less equal to LSU and Georgia. So for them to take that next step and have a bit of a target on their back, I think they have to be substantially better, especially when you consider that of the games we named, really the Georgia game was the only one where they had injuries at quarterback. And then early on in the Clemson game was, I know, a quarterback snafu. But in the rest of the season, they had Sean White, and up until the Georgia game, they had him healthy. And you kind of were what they were. So I think for them to take that next step, considering the fact that Sean White was very effective in most of those games, again, in that period where Auburn was clicking, Sean White was leading the conference in yards per attempt. Stidham is going to have to give them a kind of a different level at passing the ball against, the Alabamas of the world, the better defenses, Georgia, LSU, Alabama, Clemson they faced last year, where the passing offense was, borderline impotent, frankly. And is that possible? Sure. But I think it is asking a lot.